Shadows of Greed. My Escape from Death. Part 1. I met David during my first year at university. He wasn't like the other guys I had known. There was something special about him. We were both young and full of dreams, determined to build a better future for ourselves. He was charming, hardworking, and passionate about everything he did. I was immediately drawn to his tenacity, how he was always on the move, working odd jobs to support his family and pay his tuition fees. I remember the first time we spoke. It was after a campus seminar. David had asked me for my thoughts on the topic, and before I knew it, we were lost in conversation for hours. He talked about how he wanted to start a business one day, to build something from the ground up and leave a legacy for his children. His eyes sparkled when he spoke of the future, and I believed in him. His ambition, though grand, felt genuine. As our relationship blossomed, we became inseparable. David's hustle was admirable. He juggled his studies and multiple jobs, while I focused on my degree in education. We shared dreams of the life we would build together, often fantasizing about the small house we would live in after graduation, the trips we'd take, and the business he would start. Life wasn't easy, but we had each other, and that felt like enough. However, life has a way of throwing curveballs. After graduation, things didn't go as smoothly as we had planned. David's business ideas, though solid in theory, struggled to take off. He invested his savings into a small venture selling electronics, but the market was competitive, and he couldn't keep up with the big retailers. Our financial situation became tight, but I stood by him. I had just started teaching at a local school, and though my salary was modest, I contributed as much as I could. We were scraping by, but we were hopeful. There was still a spark in David's eyes, even as we faced setbacks. "We're going to make it," he would say to me every night. And I believed him. But then things started to take a turn for the worse. David's business didn't just struggle, it collapsed. He had taken a loan from a microfinance bank, hoping it would give him the boost he needed to expand. But instead of growth, the market became even tougher, and within months, he was drowning in debt. The pressure of repaying the loan, combined with the bills piling up at home, weighed heavily on him. I watched as the man I loved became increasingly frustrated, angry at the world for not giving him a break. Our conversations became less about the future and more about how to survive the present. He stopped talking about his dreams. Instead, he became withdrawn, spending hours sitting silently, staring into space, as if trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. "David, we'll get through this," I would tell him, trying to lift his spirits. But he wasn't listening anymore. The weight of failure had consumed him. Then came the arguments. At first, they were small disagreements about money, about how we could make ends meet. But they quickly escalated. David became irritable, snapping at me over the smallest things. The once sweet and supportive man I knew was disappearing, replaced by someone cold and distant. One night, after another heated argument, he said something that chilled me to the bone. "I'm tired of struggling, Grace. I need to find another way. I can't keep living like this." I didn't know what he meant at the time, but I knew something had shifted in him. The light in his eyes was fading, and in its place, there was something darker, something desperate. A few weeks later, a new neighbor moved into our compound. His name was Victor, and from the moment he arrived, I sensed that something was off about him. He was flashy, always dressed in designer clothes, driving expensive cars, and hosting loud parties in his flat. It didn't take long for people in the compound to start whispering about him, wondering where he got his money from. But no one knew for sure. He kept his business dealings private, never saying much about his source of wealth. David, on the other hand, seemed intrigued by him. At first, he didn't show it, but I could tell he was curious. Victor represented everything David wanted: success, wealth, and a way out of the financial struggles that had been suffocating him. One evening, as we sat in our small living room, David brought up Victor in conversation for the first time. "You know, that guy Victor seems to be doing really well for himself," he said casually, but I could hear the edge of envy in his voice. Yeah, but do we really know how he's making his money? I asked, trying to steer the conversation away. Something about Victor made me uncomfortable, and I didn't want David getting involved with him. David shrugged. People are always quick to judge. Maybe he just knows how to hustle. I didn't push the issue further that night, but I had a bad feeling in my gut. Little did I know that conversation would mark the beginning of David's dangerous descent. Over the next few weeks, I noticed David and Victor spending more time together. It started with brief chats in the compound, just a casual hello here and there. But soon, David began visiting Victor's flat, sometimes staying for hours. I tried not to overthink it at first. Maybe Victor was just offering David some business advice or connections. But as their friendship grew, I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was at play. Victor had a way of getting under your skin. He was charming, charismatic, and always knew the right things to say to make you feel like he had the answers to all of life's problems. I could see how David, desperate for a solution to his financial woes, would be drawn to him. But there was an unsettling darkness behind Victor's smile. He never looked at you directly, his eyes always seemed to be calculating, as if he were 2 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. One evening, as I was returning home from work, I overheard a conversation between David and Victor outside our flat. They didn't know I was there, and I stood frozen in the shadows, listening to their words. I'm telling you, David, there are ways to make serious money, Victor was saying in a low voice. You just have to be willing to take the risk. What kind of risk? David asked, his voice tense but intrigued. There are people, powerful people, who can help you. But it's not for the faint-hearted. You have to be willing to do whatever it takes. My heart raced as I listened, fear crawling up my spine. Whatever Victor was talking about, it wasn't good. I had heard enough stories about ritualistic practices, and how some people would go to extreme lengths for wealth. I didn't want to believe that David would ever get involved in something like that, but I couldn't ignore the warning signs. I confronted David that night, asking him what he and Victor were discussing. Nothing, Grace, he said dismissively. Just business stuff. You wouldn't understand. But I did understand. I understood that David was being pulled into something dangerous, and I had no idea how to stop it. To be continued.
Is it worth